Hey, I promise not to take more than 90 seconds for this introduction. I'll just make it quick. When we talk to our children and grandchildren about our ancestors or about ourselves, we usually narrate anecdotes from our childhood or from that of our parents. How much do we know about our roots, our culture, our rich heritage, which is an envy of most other communities? Are we aware of the challenges, sacrifices, obstacles, and adversities that our forefathers faced? After years of exhaustive research, Dr. Panjwani has tried to summarize 100 years of history from 1860 to 1960 in his book of about 450 pages. I'll let him elaborate on this invaluable piece of literature that everybody will find very interesting and captivating. So, without further ado, brother and sister, a philanthropist, a medical professional, community worker, academic, writer, a friend, Dr. Sibtain Panjwani.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Now, I can't repeat everything, medical doctors and all that, so I'm going to say, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, Shabir introduced me in a very brief way, but he used the word anecdote. So, I feel that I would like to start with a little bit of an anecdote, maybe a story, to get us into the mood of the book. And I think I'd like to set the scene that the language that I'd like to use would be English and Gujarati. If it's okay, mainly English. But why Gujarati? Because sometimes, I like to speak Gujarati. And sometimes you can express certain things in Gujarati so well. So if you don't mind if I speak Gujarati, is that okay, you guys? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing, the other thing is that I would like to make this interactive. And the rationale behind this is that the book that I have written is a part 1. And the part 2 is still to be, I'm writing it. And that goes from 1960 to 2022. Now, what I would like to do is to hear your views about your journey as a community member when you came to this country in the West. And also, what you think are the challenges facing our community. And for that, I will also be asking some questions to you, and hopefully that would allow you to then respond to us based on this question, and that would help me to build the data for my next book. So I have a self-interest in that, and so thank you very much for coming here at this particular place, and thank you very much to the management committee of the Baraza group for inviting me and arranging this wonderful event. Now the story. In Gujarati હું કહીશ એક પૈસાદાર માણસ હતો અને એ હેલિકોપ્ટરમાં જતો એક બાજુથી બીજી બાજુ અને એની હેલિકોપ્ટરનું એન્જિન છે એ બગડી ગયું તો એને નીચે ઉતારવું પડ્યું અને ત્યાં એટલું સખત જંગલ હતું કે એને ખબર ન પડી કે ક્યાં છે એટલે એ ઝાડ ઉપર ચડી અને જોયું કોઈ માણસ એને દેખાય છે તો એને એક ગામડિયો આવતા જોયો. ગામડિયો સમજો છે કોણ? વિલેજમેન. એ ગામડિયાને આવતા જોયો એનું ઉતરીને એની પાસે એને પૂછે છે કે અહીંયા ક્યાંય હોટેલ છે? કે મને ખબર નથી. કે અહીંયા રેલવે સ્ટેશન છે? કે મને ખબર નથી. કે પાણીનો બંદોબસ્ત થઈ શકશે અહીંયા? કે મને ખબર નથી. એ ખાવાનો બંદોબસ્ત છે કે મને ખબર નથી કે તને કાંઈ ખબર નથી. તું અહીંયાનો માણસ છે તને કાંઈ ખબર નથી. હવે એક માણસ આપણને ખબર નથી તો આપણું માથું તો કરી દે. અને એ માણસ ઓબ્વિયસલી એ જગામાં હતો કે કબતો થયો હું ક્યાં છું. તો કે તને કાંઈ ખબર નથી. તો આ માણસ ગામો જઈને શું કે એ કે તને ખબર નથી કે તું ક્યાં છો, મને ખબર છે હું ક્યાં છું. So this book is wonderfully about where we have come from, where we are, and where we want to go. This is what this book is about. Now I've taken a historical arc from 1860 to 1960. And the question I've always asked are two. One of them is this, that how come that you started to write this book? Now this is coming from mainly Korea community. And look at the mindset of Korea. Why do you want to write this book? What does it tell you? It tells us that perhaps you are not interested in where we are coming from. Perhaps we don't know and that we don't care about who we are. That could be the rationale. And so I want to share with you why I started to write this book, and in fact, you will see that in the book, in the preface. But very, very briefly, I was appointed as Secretary General of Marhumullah Sahib in 1996. He died in 2000, and then up to 2003. So I had a 7-year period working with a man who, in my opinion, was a profound leader who understood the pulse of the community. And in many ways, when I was Secretary General of Marhumullah Sahib, many weekends I used to spend with him. And I remember in our office, if you go to the annex in Stanmore, you'll see the World Federation office. It used to be there, and it's a tiny office. And there's a sofa there. He used to lie down in the sofa, and I used to make him a cup of tea, and he used to lie down and talk about the community. This was our community, Sibtain. This is who they are, this is what we are. And one question always was in my mind. What is significant about this community? Why do we exist as a community? Now, these are the questions. And one day, when I was coming to the Simco conference in 1996, I remember our walk from the Hujjat Imam Barak to the Hujjat office. This is about 40 steps. And I asked him a question. What is the purpose of the community? Why do we exist as a community, and what are we doing as a community? You know, this question, I want to ask him, that I went to the Simco, and I wanted to know what was his view about what is the purpose of this community. What's the objective of this community? And as we were walking, he didn't answer me, and then as we entered the office, he asked me to sit down and said that, look, and he gave me and he had an ability to say so many things in few words, by the way. And he said to me, sit down, and he said, write it down. He said that the destiny of this community is one. We exist to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our job as a leadership of this community is to redistribute as much of our wealth from the wealthy to the poor. So he said, this is our objective. We exist to serve on his behalf, and we redistribute the wealth as much as possible, which is in our hand. So when we went to Skardu is a place in Pakistan, Baltistan, some beautiful place on the foothills of Himalaya. I went with him for 10 days. 10 nights I stayed there, I think, 10 nights. And at night time there's nothing to do. It's a very cold place. And so you have a room with a stove, a burning stove. So you sit down, nothing to do from South to Maghrib prayers. And this is where we used to then end up with a conversation about many things. And one day we ended up with a conversation about the history and the language of our community. I thought I knew a lot about my community. But when I heard what he had to say about the sadness that he reflected in his conversation with me, that our community is losing its heritage, the community is losing its language, That time I understood that as a globalized community, by that time we were globalized, that if we did not keep on holding on to our heritage and our history, then we will exist perhaps as a community, but not with an identity. We will just be a community, maybe a cultural, maybe small cultural, or perhaps a community without any name but existence. So that is the reason why, the rationale behind writing this book. Now, the second question that I've asked is that, how did you start? Now that's interesting, because when I started to look at the community, it has so many dimensions to it. I did not know where to begin. And so I started to search for a record. Who was the first person that is recorded in our community archive? And the first person recorded was Haji Satipira. Anyone knows Haji Satipira? Bashirbai, you know Haji Satipira.
Not personally.
No, but you know of him and his family. So I got the name. Once I got the name, I started to see what sort of background. Where did he come from? Why did he come there to Dar es Salaam or Zanzibar? What made him come to Zanzibar and nowhere else? These were the questions that I began to ask. And so I created a history and a story behind this, around this man. And when I created this story, I then began to picture a book. And this is the 5 chapters that I have written, starting with Haji Satipira, the first person recorded in our history who came to Zanzibar. He was only 3 years old when his parents brought him. So when he landed in Zanzibar, there was his uncle there, but then they were going to Kilwa. And as they were going to Kilwa, the dhow on which they were sailing had an accident and the parents died. So he was brought back to Zanzibar, and then he stayed with his uncle. Then he went on to the coast of Tanganyika. There he stayed in a village called Jimwema, which is now Dar es Salaam. And he was one of the first Asians to be in Jimwema, which then became Dar es Salaam. So this is what I had. And then I started to ask, well, where was he born? He was born in Manwe in Kutch. Why did he come to Zanzibar? That was the most difficult thing for me to ascertain, because you don't have records. So what I decided to do was look at the historical arc. What were the conditions in 1839 which could have led him to move from Manwe to wherever he wanted to go, to Zanzibar? There were 3 big factors which led him to move out. The first one was famine. There was a famine in Kutch, in parts of Gujarat, which made the life very difficult for the Khoja community there. And so one factor was famine. The second was the abolition of slavery. In 1830s, there was the movement to abolish slavery. But in its place, the British government put an indentured labor scheme, where 1 million Indians moved out from 1830 to 1920, when the indentured labor scheme was stopped. And so that was another factor which could have led the community members to come out from Gujarat to the coast of East Africa. And the third factor was Indian Ocean. Indian Ocean was a trading world where all sorts of people used to trade with each other. Sailors and the traders from East Africa coast, Somalia coast from Muscat, traded with the western coast of India. And so Indian Ocean was a huge trading world. And one reason why they came out from India and not displaced internally in India, within India, is the fact that they had in front of them the sea, Indian Ocean. So they took this transportation of dal and they managed to come to East Africa. Now the question is, they didn't come to Bagamoyo, they didn't come to Kilwa, they didn't come to Mombasa first, they came to Zanzibar. Zanzibar was a place, a hub of trade. Lots of people were there trading with each other. So Zanzibar was a place where our Koga began their journey or settlement in East Africa. So this is how I constructed the story in the book. I just want to go very, very quickly the 5 chapters that I have written. The first chapter was the Koja community itself, where the Hadith of Supira emerged from. Who is a Koja community? So you read in the book, I don't want to go into that because otherwise you won't buy the book. I want to set a scene for you. So, Koja community. We have a history of 700 years in Islam through Koja community. Pir Sadruddin, when he came to a Luhana Bhatia trading community, a caste community, converted them to become a Muslim. You know how he converted? He didn't say become Islam, become a Muslim. He actually looked at what was the religion of this Luhanas and Bhatiyas. It was Hinduism. So he looked at Hinduism, and they were expecting an avatar, a future person to come. And he said, he has already come and his name is Ali. And then he mixed Islam and Hindu and called it Satpanthi. Satpanthi means the searching for the truth. So, Satpanthi, so those who believed in Satpanthi, then he named them Khwaja. Khwaja means master. And then that corrupted itself to Khoja. So then we became a Khoja community with Pir Sadruddin giving us all sorts of things, the language coach team, books, writing, accounts, very secretly we were. We hired many things, particularly our figures. But then we became a rule-based community, Khoja community. But the thing is, that when I started to look at the Khoja community itself, it's a very clouded, very hazy community. History. It depends upon how you view Khoja community. If you look at it from the Ismaili lens, then the Ismailis would trace itself to Pir Sadruddin as an Ismaili community. If you look at other academic work, then they trace it through as a Hindu community with Islam coming in and not purely Islamic or purely Ismaili connection. So a lot of research needs to be done. So I have actually a chapter in it where I'm actually consolidating a lot of academic positions of Khoja community and then coming up with some conclusions. So I don't want to go into that, it will bore you. The second chapter is then what I described how we came from India to Africa. The third and the fourth chapter is a very interesting chapter because I now discuss the Khoja community in Zanzibar and how Khoja Shia Ithnashari community emerged in Zanzibar. And two things are interesting. One is that we parted from the main Khoja community which was in Zanzibar. So we had a lot of problems. A lot of abuses was going on there. A lot of oppression was going on there. Because there was a powerful Khoja community, Ismaili community, and we parted from that Khoja Ismaili community and called ourselves Khoja Shia Ithnashari. By 1877, we had our Jamaat. By 1881, we had our first mosque in Zanzibar. Zanzibar, how many of you come from Zanzibar? MashaAllah, Zanzibar actually provided us with the identity Khoja Shia Ithnashari. These Zanzibarians who are here, you should be proud of the fact that you gave us the identity Khoja Shia Ithnashari.
You should all buy the book.
The chosen ones beside the Jews.
And every one of us has some connection with Zanzibar, by the way. Anyway, there was, when the first mosque was constructed in 1881, Uwat Mosque, we were only about 250 heads, individuals. And then Aga Khan came to visit us, the community, and when he saw the Khoja Shia Ithnashari having their own mosque, their own imambars by then, their own community, he began to issue very strong farmat to his own community that look, do not allow these rituals in Jamaat Khana. At one time, we used to, the Khoja community had a space called Jamaat Khana. And in the Jamaat Khana, you can do namaz, and you can do bandagi, and Muharram program used to be held there. So Jamaat Khana was for everyone, the whole Khoja community. Shantis were doing their bit, Ismailis were doing their bit, but the farmers began to come, and then of course the Khoja community, Shia Ishnashis were isolated. And so they had to part from that very strong community, and we were a very small community, and we had to sort of go through a lot. So 10 years down the line, we split up. The Khoja Shia Ishnashis split up. It amazes me that we split up from the Khoja Ismailis, and then 10 years down the line, we ourselves split up. We have a history of splitting ourselves. We are a courageous group like that. We want to split. So there you are. We became Hujjat and Kubat. But whilst we were splitting, and there's a narrative why we split, and I don't want to go into that, we began to work towards our identity. The three things which, in my opinion, helped us to forge our identity. One was Azadari, the other was Zakirin, from our own community, not from others. Particularly female Zakirin as well. And the role of the female, I think, is underestimated. And I'm working at it, by the way, so that our community know that this community, the role the female members have played is huge. But we still dump them. I'm sorry to use that word, dump them. But we still put them behind. But their contribution was superb. Superb. And I mean that. But anyway, that's another thing. Where was I? I've forgotten my train of thought.
So two things now, you have to go into the third one. There were three factors you said. You talked about.
You talk about the split within
The split within, that's right, yes. You see, I get carried away, so please, so you keep a check on me. So the Farmans began. The community started, Azadari, Zakirin, and the third thing is Mafil. Mafil, where all the females used together, and they started to form their own social network. And we began to form our own identity based on some of these rituals. So I go on to describing in detail about these sort of factors on third and the fourth chapter. The fifth chapter, the third and fourth, the fifth is where I discuss the role of the entrepreneurs. As we grew from Dukkavalas to become the entrepreneurs in our own right, we had contributed so well to the community by then. By 1960, as I said yesterday, by 1960, our population was only 10,000 in Tanganyika, Uganda, Kenya, and Zanzibar. But we had 1,000 different businesses. This was the extent of our entrepreneurship within East Africa. So, I then go on to discuss the entrepreneurship. I then go on to discuss the philanthropy, because the Omani Sultanate, the British colonial government, the German colonial government did not pay attention to our needs. They were self-interested. They were interested in their own. They used, I'm looking at it from my lens, they used us, the Asian community, for their interest. And if you look at the way Dar es Salaam grew, the way Tanga grew, you will see how Dar es Salaam, for example, developed. There was a European area, there was an Asian area, and then there was a Swahili or the African area. And when Asia needed schools, when Asia needed social help, when Asia needed their own hospitals and health clinics, the government were not forthcoming to give them that. We had to have our own funding to do all these things, and we developed as a separate institution, as a separate community, as against, say, Hindu or Bohora or Africans or Europeans. So we had our own sort of setups. It's the way the British treated us. So I discussed all that. And the entrepreneurs and the philanthropists helped us to build the institutions in our community. Philanthropists have played a huge role in making in the institutionalization of our community. So then I discuss all that. And then the last thing is that our great-grandfather were interested in preserving our faith. And so what they did was they made sure that as we grew as a community, we became a rule-based community. The reason why we became a rule-based community, because we have a history of being rule-based community. From Khoja community was a rule-based community. So the concept of Kamriya, the concept of Mukhi, and all that has come from the Khoja community. They had the Kamriya, they had the Mukhi, they had the rules, they marched together, amicably resolved their conflicts. All that was historical. That history was brought into our own community as well, for some of it. So we began to institutionalize, and then some of the concepts we borrowed from, obviously, the British education and then the German colonial aspects to it as well. So as we institutionalized, first into Jamaat, and then some of these intellectuals in our community, particularly one, you will see that there are 2 or 3 in the book that I described. One of them is the father of Aziz Sajidina. He was intellectually very considered as an intellectual, and he actually started the discussion on forming a regional federation. And so I discussed the whole idea and the notion of Africa Federation, the first conference, and the first 10 resolutions I discussed in the book. And look at those 10 resolutions, you will understand the vision of our forefathers. When they passed those resolutions, you can understand what was a message behind those resolutions. And I discussed that. And eventually, in my concluding chapter, I then discussed the whole notion of our social-religious identity, and I then go on to defining the identity Khoja, Shia, Fitna, Ashari. The first definition that I have produced, which is in this book. This is a resume of my book, so if you buy it, this is what you're going to look at. That's the art. Now, as we globalized, our challenges became unique. Our challenges became different. And so, I am writing about the development and the evolution of this of our community from 1960 as a community based in East Africa, very narrow base, to becoming a global community now, and the challenges it faced and will face, and I'm writing it in this book. Now, I can only write it in an evidentiary way if I can collect enough data. And so what I want to do is to have your input as to when you came to this country, what you saw, how you felt, how you see the community moving forward, how you see the challenges of the community. I would really like to hear from you. And so that far side of the equation in today's event will be the interactive one. So if I started to pose 5 questions I have, I'll start with number 1. And if I can have your input, I would be very grateful to you, because that would help me write the next chapters of our history. Now, before we start on that, if you need or want any clarification, want to know anything about it, about this particular book that I've written, we can have a discussion, shall we, for 5-7 minutes, and then we go into the interactive on 5 questions, which are actually very, these questions are very sort of deep questions, so feel free to give me the answers if you don't mind.
Dr. Panjwani, I have a quick question.
Yeah, just 1 minute. Sorry about that. Have I got it? Sorry. Have I spoiled anything?
Thank you, Dr. Panjwani. Before we start any discussion and Q&A, we have a short announcement from the chairperson of the seniors group, if you permit.
Right.
Just a couple of minutes.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. You know the history so far. Actually, this is the first time I'm hearing about all this richness of Kodeshi Aishnashis, and believe me, it's mesmerizing. I really enjoyed it, and I would just like to make a suggestion before I make an announcement that when very fortunately we have here our own school. And what we can do is we can introduce these books to the children who are leaving, the students who are leaving the school, let's say within 2-3 years. That's the time we introduce these books to them and tell them how important it is to hang on to their rich heritage. And I'm sure it'll make a lot of difference. So now I will go on to my announcement. Tomorrow 2:30, please if you can support us seniors also at the mosque. We are going to have Dr. Sibtain Panjwani shed some more light on this richness, and then of course we will end with correct chai and yummy mandazis. Thank you.
A very good suggestion, if I may say so, about the children. Very genuine.
Okay, thank you very much, Sibtain Bhai. You mentioned some discussions before we start some
Yeah,
Q&A.
on this book, if you want to know anything more about this book, before we go on to the interactive side, so that you can help me prepare for the part 2.
I just have a quick question. In your research and writing of this book, did you also get references from other works in other books which have been written on this subject? For example, there is a book by Marhum Hassan and Jafar, The Endangered Species. Did you get any material from there, for example?
Of course, yes. Actually, if you look at my book, if you compare it with Hassan Bhai's book, Marhum Hassan takes a different arc altogether. He is not concentrating on the East African Khoja. I am. And if you ask me, why am I concentrating on East African Khoja? I have to say that it is that group within the Khoja community which actually institutionalized in such a way that it allowed many other Khoja Ishnarsis from throughout the world to become globalized within an institution. So it started from there. It is their mindset. And I wanted to express in the book what sort of mindset our great grandfather had. Beautiful. The principles they used, the way they decided. There were 2 historical norms that I actually captured in this book. One of them is for migration for economic prosperity, and the other one is the preservation of our socio-religious identity, and the way they did it so successfully that today we are benefiting from that success. Now our job is to give it to our children. Are we prepared? This is the part 2 now. Anyway, we can discuss that in the part 2.
By the way, I haven't read The Endangered Species.
No, but you should.
Yeah, I have it.
Yeah. But then it is a must. Yeah, I have to.
But now that I'm buying your book and going to read it, I'll make sure that I read that too and get some.
Yeah. In fact, if you look at my footnoting and bibliography, you'll understand how academic it is.
Thank you.
Dr. Panjwani, I had a quick question for you. You mentioned that one family that you really dug deep into, the one parents
Shakespeare.
Did you research any other families? The reason I'm curious is because from what I heard from my grandfather and father, we are originally from Arusha and Babati.
Which one?
Arusha, and there's a city called Babati,
Babati.
100 miles away from
Yeah.
Arusha. we were known as Shema and Sergeant Somji.
Yeah.
And they were quite pioneers. Did you ever touch or come across?
I have touched him. I have touched Somji.
Yeah. So is that in this book or?
Yes, I guess it is.
Thank you. Just was curious.
But let me expand on that, by the way. I mean, the question is that why did I look at such a period? I looked at such a period because I looked at the records of our community, and the record told me that the first person mentioned in the record is Haji Satipira. And therefore, I'm duty bound in that sense to take that as an official recorded name. But then when I started to talk about it, I then understood that there is another family which had come in 1835. So then I asked them that if you send me the record, then obviously I would. But I needed to have an official record so that evidentially I can say that this is from an official record. Otherwise, all sorts of families will say, my grandfather came in 1810.
Because I recall my father telling me that his father and grandfather came, the first Asian settlers in Arusha in the Babati area in the early 1800s. So they could have been, they claim that they were the first Asians to be in that part of the world. I don't know how.
Well, but in Zanzibar, before the three routes were identified to go into the interior of East Africa, there were three routes. One was the northern route from Mombasa, Tanga into Lake Victoria and then Uganda. The central route in Bagamoyo, Ujiji, Tabora, and then on to the Congo and all that. And then the southern route through Kilwa and then Lindi and then Lake Malawi. So there was Lake Malawi, Lake Tanganyika, and Lake Victoria. So the interior was well after it was 1860, 70 like that. So there is a claim, the people will claim that we were the first one in Kilwa. First one in Lindi, or first one in Jinja, Mbale, Kabiramailo, like that. But in Zanzibar, there was already a Khoja community well before 1820.
So it's conceivable.
But Khoja community, not Khoja Shia.
It was conceivable they all came to Zanzibar and then rushed down.
Most of them came to Zanzibar. Therefore, Zanzibar was a hub. Zanzibar prepared the community people to go into the interior. Had they not come to Zanzibar and learned the skills, they would not have been able to go into the interior. And some of these guys walked for 200 miles, 300 miles just to, and with others helping them, but walking. And there was no cars or anything like that. There was jungle, no health facilities, animals. But they were courageous. And they set up a dukkha there. And they became a dukkha and then entrepreneurs. And some of them came as young as 12 years old, with nothing, just having a help from the community, with the principle that there is some of my community that was going to help. Yeah. Sorry, yes, sorry.
Assalamualaikum.
Alaykum salam.
We've never met in person, but we've exchanged emails.
I think I know who you are.
Shubir. So my question relates to the book specifically, and understanding it's a historical narrative of the history of this community. Do you, in this book, at any time touch on social issues? And by that I mean issues like the racism that was inherent or incumbent on not just our community, but also the Hindu, the Sikhs, and other Asian communities towards the indigenous population, the blacks. And it's always been a bit of a disconnect for me. And I'll tell you why. It's that the other communities have faiths that don't necessarily, I may be wrong, but don't necessarily always emphasize the equality of the races the way our faith does. And yet there we were, and I think we would all admit to it, our forefathers probably exhibited some form of racism towards the indigenous population, despite what our faith teaches us. Okay? And I think it's gotten better over time. Certainly since we've, over the last decades or few decades, we've become a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more aware. But you still hear it. You still hear it in not this Baraza circle, but in other Baraza circles and things like where people, make glib remarks like "Aloka karya, amshe, temshe," things like that. So I just wondered, in your book, do you touch on social issues at all, or try to explain that kind of disconnect between us having those feelings, and yet our faith teaching us something entirely different?
Yeah.
Both of you.
Yeah. Yes, I do. And let me tell you, the way you have portrayed the situation is from a lens which is particularly portrayed from the colonial lens. Particularly the British and the German, when their own self-interest portrayed Asians in many ways, and you can have the academic papers for that. In many ways, it's the Asians who are exploiting the Africans. But think, when you look at it from the lens of the community, our great-grandfather were able to traverse the path into the interior. The first Asians who went there, they settled there. They interacted with them. They didn't start to call them blacks or anything like that. They didn't understand the language either. But they learned. They served them. What does it tell us? It tells us one thing, that when they went there, they didn't go with that racism in their mind. They went there to make economic prosperity for themselves and to see how they can settle there. So they had to, by nature and by fitra, they had to work, they had to make a good relationship with the indigenous people. Otherwise, we would have not been able to go into the interior the way we have. But then, the mindset, which was the German and the colonial mindset, they had their own, I touched about this very well. They had their own mindset. When it suited them, we were their friends. When it didn't suit them, they discarded us. No matter how much they wanted them to serve us, our community. They said, well, it's not in our interest. They built one school, I think in Zanzibar, even something, I don't know, but it was government-based. But the majority of the schools that were built in Tanganyika, Zanzibar, Tanganyika, Kenya, and Uganda, were built by our community, or Asian community together. We did the job. So we survived the Omani Sultanate. We survived the British colonialism. We survived the German colonialism. So a question like that will emerge after the colonial education, after the history that is taught to us from their lens. And then a question like that comes. But when originally we asked the British and the academician who was writing this book, see it from my own community's lens. My great-grandfather went there, he didn't go with a race in their mind. He went for economic prosperity and built a relationship with the guys he's going to settle.
So beyond the colonial period, what?
Beyond the colonial period in 1960 to 2022, that's you have to wait. You have to wait, my friend.
But you don't,
That's what
you don't deny that there was that
racism
sensitive
exists both in Africa,
Yeah.
even within their tribe. So, if you're going to talk about the Asian racism, we also have to talk about African racism, European racism, all communities racism. And we then have to contextualize it exactly in that way. Then it will make sense. But if you only say Khojas were racist, as important a couple of years ago, there was a big banner that Khojas here were racist, well, how can you make that claim? But if you're going to make that claim,
Yeah.
then let's look at the racism from all angles,
So
and then come to it.
disconnect between our faith and us.
Now, disconnect with our faith, that's a larger question.
Yeah.
Of course, Islamic principle is a principle from Islam. Muslims, the way they live, is a different ballgame altogether. It's a different history. Islamic principle is principle. If we follow the principle, we are following Islam in the right way. If we don't, then don't blame Islam. The faith, of course, is there, but Muslims are not following the faith.
Right.
That's what the claim you can make.
Right.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Shabir.
Yes.
Shabir.
Assalamualaikum. Before I get to the question, I'll be very brief on your question. Just to touch on what Shabir Bhai mentioned on the issue of racism. Like you said, when we had our forefathers coming to Africa, they did not have racism in mind. But to some extent, when we had power, when we developed, they developed businesses, we had wealth, the racism did gradually come into society, but it was a type of racism which that was developing or that is currently happening in any, irrespective of whether it was the Khojas or the European people or anybody. We still have the racism still going on around the world. But I would like to mention our community, when you, Sibtain, mentioned about the religious aspect, and is there a disconnect? Now, if we look back, Bilal Muslim Mission, again, it is not within the sphere of your book. You ended in 1960. Bilal Muslim Mission, I think, started in 1964, right? And the Bilal Muslim Mission, one of its dictums was to reach out to the locals. And regularly, when we look back, and this will all come in part 2 of your book, but you know how we have developed schools, we have developed hospitals. Today, the Al-Muntazir school in Dar es Salaam probably is 85% indigenous people right in our projects. So, you know, and even the line of approach, how the Bilal Muslim Mission developed Shia centers, where we had, and there was the worry, there was also, misinterpretation of how our Africans were being allowed openly in the mosque, but we also had to be pragmatic. So Shia centers were opened by the Bilal Muslim Mission. And people, so that was a subject of racism, you know, it's the community definitely has its conscience as far as what religious guidance is. Religious guidance clearly says, leave alone sectarism. When you say you're a Sunni or a Shia or a Wahhabi, we are not even allowed sectarism in Islam because the Quran says there's only one Islam, right? So in the same way, racism is absolutely, there is a no-brainer that it's not allowed in any way. So that's the issue of that. But second, I was curious to know, I've got your book. I bought it in Dar es Salaam just 2 or 3 weeks before I came here, and I'm still not ready. I was supposed to bring it with me, and I forgot it in Dar. So I cannot really comment on what you've written, Aisha. When we after reading the book, I'll be able to reach out to you. But I was curious to know, because being in the Africa Federation, you did seek some help from the archives section. So in your book, what extent, maybe you cannot mention it by percentage, but was the archives section of the Africa Federation did it help you a lot towards writing this book? And had it not been there, would you have been able to write this book?
That's a good question. Apart from Africa Federation archives section, which did help, there are individuals who have their own personal archive. And they also say, I do put it in my forward, their archive also helped me. Africa Federation's archive, considering our rich history, is a very small archive in that sense. So, but it did help. It helped immensely because some of the materials have been gathered and formulated into articles. So obviously I had to then make sure that the dots join together and the commas are in the right place. So it is, in short, yes, it did help.
Okay, next
I'm
question.
glad that it was there.
We have a couple of gentlemen with questions, but where's the ladies' power that you was talking about? Nobody wants to ask questions or make suggestions?
Assalamualaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Congratulations on your book. It's a wonderful contribution.
Thank you.
I wanted to know, with all this research you did, must have been amazing, like a huge amount. How did you organize, and what did you leave out?
Lots of things I had to leave out, but that doesn't mean that it was not important. But what I had done is I had to create a narrative, otherwise the book would have been never ending. So in my narrative, I did take into consideration a lot of other things, but they have a mention rather than. But the narrative actually is concentrating on our social-religious identity, and therefore that focus the social-religious identity, and therefore there are things that perhaps did not play a part in that I have left it out. But I think majority of it I have taken. I needed to because it's an academic book. I'm hoping that this will be a book which can be picked up by any researcher, and then they'll be able to do the research in the community because there is a fantastic bibliography and also footnoting there. I had that in mind because one thing, I'll tell you one thing, my son, Imran, who is the editor of this book, he gave an arc of our history to in University of Jordan, just recently. 2 months ago. And he talked about the history of our community. And you know what? They were not Khojas, right? They were all known Khojas, Muslims, Turkish, Iranian, pin drop silence. They heard the history of Khoja and they marveled at our history. And when they knew that we were only 90,000 to 150,000, maybe, I don't think 150, I think we're about maybe 90 to 120. And it's such a small community without resources like oil wells, army, country, nothing. And yet we are a global community with institutionalization and then building of mosques everywhere, sacred places everywhere, humanitarian help, small community like that. And then the courageous action of our forefathers to change the religion coming out of the security of the Khoja community to become a Khoja Shia international community based on faith. They marveled at it. They were enlightened by it, moved by it. We are not moved by it, we are not enlightened by it. That's our problem. But they are interested that a small community like that can survive 160 years in global world. That's our strength.
Masha.
What was your question? I forgot to answer that. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for an excellent presentation. Of course, I've heard it before as well. So I will be reading your book cover to cover. Our entrepreneurial spirit is really what I'm more interested in. You talked about Zanzibar, you talked about Dar es Salaam, Mombasa was another hub, the coastal areas. But many of our forefathers sort of walked, as you said earlier, in response to one of the questions, from the coast to interior places.
To Tabora particularly.
Tabora, my grandfather, he migrated to Africa at the age of 14. And he walked from Dar es Salaam to Kigoma.
Wow.
He was employed by the German army or a German company or whatever.
Right.
With, only either slaves or helpers or workers, don't know, but taking supplies for the Germans up to Kigoma. And he had his machete, and that was it, walking all the way through, right? How much of that kind of history do you have in the book? Because the interior was developed by all these people. Nasriji family, Ladamegji family, in Mwanza, I come from Mwanza, right? So they played an important role too.
Huge role.
Huge role, right? So how much of that is coming in?
It's there. Actually, if you look at if I can sectionalize it for you, the book is 460 pages. Majority of those pages relate to what you're saying. So every town where we had a Jamaat, I have mentioned it, and what I've done is I have mentioned the names of the people who originally were there, so that I'm hoping that as you read the book and it clicks, oh, this is my grandfather, I'm hoping that you can communicate either with the heritage in Mark or with me personally and give us the data. That will help us immensely, because we now need, people are dying in our community. Those people who knew about our community are going in the cupboard with that. The richest place is a Khoja Kabristan, by the way, because they're taking everything there. We don't want to express our history. We are taking it there. What good is it there?
Right.
It must be us. Anyway, so I mentioned all these names, so hopefully you'll give us all this information.
Sibtain, thank you on behalf of the whole community for initiating this wonderful project, and may Allah
By
bless
the
you.
way, Adiraja, thank you very much. I'm stopping you here because otherwise I forget the point. People who have helped me, it's not the institutions, it's not the leadership, it's you guys. You open up the doors for me. And I have to thank you guys, ordinary people of our community. When I started the Awakening Project, it's you guys, the simple grassroots who actually opened the doors for me, and I was able to produce the book. So thank you very much. And thank you very much.
You're so humble.
No, thank you. Seriously, I have to thank my community.
I want to comment on one of the things. you mentioned that outside people, they appreciate more our rich heritage. We had a visit from our Deputy Prime Minister during BC time, Jason Kenney. He was a Minister of Finance and he was also a Deputy Minister. He visited JCC, and when he looked at a little bit of our history, this was his comment, and he started with this thing. I would like to thank Idi Amin for his loss has been our gain. So he gave a certificate, and this is exactly what you're saying. Another thing, I want you to put it in perspective for the audience. When you mentioned that in 10,000 population, we had 10,000 head, we had 1,000 businesses. Different businesses. That means there were probably 2,000 families or 3,000 families. So that's a phenomenal statistic.
Yeah, about 2,000 families.
Yes. Another thing that I want to ask you, if you have mentioned in this book, or if you have seen any connection between the slavery and abolishment of slavery with our migration and with our growth.
What do you mean by, can you just expand on that so that I understand it?
Yeah. Slavery and abolishment of the slavery in the world.
Right. Okay. Right. Really, our migration per se wasn't directly related to slavery or abolition of slavery, but it had played a role. Because after abolition of slavery, the indentured labor scheme was concocted by the British government of India because they need the outpost in Fiji, in South America, in East Africa needed labor. So they had to create the system of indentured labor system from 1830s up to 1920. 1 million Indians left India. So that could be a role played in the movement of migration of our community, which is a small community, out of India to East Africa. Alirazam, in my research, I did not think, or I did not come across, the Khoja Ishnachis coming out of India based on indentured labor scheme. The Punjabis came, but the Gujaratis came in their own right. I sometimes call them as entrepreneurs, but more likely to be explorers as well, because some of the internal aspect of our movement was done by Africans themselves first, and then followed by Indians. So many times you say, oh, this guy found the origin of Nile. Africans and Indians found it before him, before the Europeans made it their history. They forget that it was one of our community members who directed Vasco da Gama to go from East Africa to Calcutta. So there's no mention in the history, but our lens speaks about that. And I made it very clear. I'm proud of the fact. I'm proud of the fact that I made this book based on the fact that I'm looking at my community from my own lens and not colonial lens. You can write whatever you want to do, it's your business. But I'm writing my community from my experience and my lived-in experience of my community, and lenses from my own community who tells me how they felt, what they felt. So this must be given. And I do mention it in the book. And I'm proud of the fact that I'm doing it. And my son, Imran, has written the introduction on it, explaining the methodology. Because I know that academics will pick up this book and tear it to shred. But if there is methodology explained, then their economics counter it. And this methodology is wrong. Let them prove that methodology is wrong. But anyway, I'm after my own community.
Okay,
if my own community is happy with this book, I don't mind what they think.
We have one more question here in the interest of time after this one.
Oh, but I'm asking it.
No, questions about this.
Oh, great.
Okay. So maybe after Khalil's question, we'll stop.
Just a very quick comment on the slavery. After the abolition of slavery, our community, the rich businessmen, were involved in financing the slave trade because the Arabs continued with the slavery from Africa to, but our businessmen, prominent businessmen, were involved in financing that.
Now, Manuel, I wrestled with the question, I'll tell you. Yeah, I did. Because obviously slavery was still going on in Zanzibar, and the British government had to, for their own interest, they were not to stop the slavery, but they wanted control of Zanzibar. So then, on the guise of that, they came and said, "Oh, Omani Sultanate, you must not do the slavery." Omani bought out Singapore. I wrestled with it because I thought, oh, now slavery, ivory business. How much of our business were involved with that? So I started digging into it, okay? On our own records, there is no mention of it. They don't mention that directly we were involved with slavery. In any case, our business was Lukawal at that time, so we were perhaps giving them some goods and all that, but not directly involved with it, as Arabs were and as others were. So we were not directly involved. I mean, I had to do it. So I don't mention that I did not find it. Whether indirectly we were involved, $64 question. London.
Sorry. First of all, I'd like to echo some of the comments about the appreciation for the effort that you put into this book. I think memorializing our history is so important. There's so many lessons we can learn. I also think it's a great idea to think about introducing this into an academic environment where we can teach it at either the grade school or even the university level. And I look forward to your next book because I was born in the 60s, so
Everyone is looking forward to that because with a vacant breath, by the way. They want to know what I think.
My question is about the original decision to leave in 1860. You mentioned they're looking at the Indian Ocean. I've driven by many large bodies of water. Not once have I thought, I want to cross this body of water for any reason. So there must have been a problem they were solving for. I mean, I know there were a lot of factors you mentioned, but what was the problem in 1860 that they were solving for that made them take this decision, which was a threat to their life and livelihood, to cross this big body of water and sail? What was the driving force, do you think?
They did not think that it was a big thing. No, because this Indian Ocean world, trading world, has existed for 2,000 years. And this is how the trade was, and it is the best way to travel from one place to another. For them, west coast of India was full of people going out into the ocean, beyond those coastlines into Muscat, and then onto the Somali coast and to the East African Zanzibar, East Africa, Madagascar. So for them, it was not a big deal. To them, it was a normal thing. It was an Indian Ocean which was out there where trading was taking place for 2,000 years. And so they considered, why not? Why should I go into Mumbai? People did go to Mumbai. So why should I go internal when there is a whole world out there? And that's the courage.
Wasn't it because of the famine?
Yeah, one factor was famine, of course. But then they had a way out in the ocean trading world. So why not we explore for better prospects out there, wherever it is? They used to go to Muscat first, and from Muscat down to Zanzibar.
There's a very good book by Professor Abdul Sharif, which you probably know about,
Yes.
called Tao Cultures of the Indian Ocean. And that explains exactly what Sibtain Panjwani was talking about. This whole world that had existed for 1,000 years before we traded, and people trading between China and Malaysia and India and Muscat and the Arabian Peninsula, and then down to East Africa.
It must have been perilous. Like at some level,
Oh, yeah,
you were like, you may never come back.
Oh yeah, a lot of people lost their lives.
But then the journey from Zanzibar into the interior of East Africa was even more perilous. They didn't really want to know the culture, but they took the chance. The other thing is very interesting is the Zanzibar culture was a beautiful culture. It's a Swahili culture. Swahili culture gave them the space where every culture can. Swahili people are very generous people. And Swahili civilization, which you don't know much about, but you read up about it, it's a beautiful civilization. That culture allowed other cultures to coexist. And so as we came in from India, we felt comfortable. They are welcoming people. And if you sit with them, eat with them, walk with them, there's no racism there. The racism is a colonial mindset, as you know. How did the racism come about? It didn't come about Indians coming there and saying, you're black, you're black, you're Indians. That's not how it works. It's a mindset. You are superior than him by virtue of the color and your civilization, which is superior to his civilization. It's only now that we understand that every civilization has ups and downs, and at the moment the whole paradigm is shifting from the west to the east. What do you think of them? For 2,000 years, Asians ruled the economic. For 2,000, for 1,800. The last 200 years, the West were the dominant economic power. But for 1,800, Asia was the dominant power. Just going back to them.
Okay, I think we have come to the end of Q&A, so let's go to the next Q.
Right.
Whatever.
So we have a little break and then I go into the second part of it, or do you think you're all tired? Then we can.
Well, no, I think we are planning a break downstairs after we finish.
Okay.
So we have a chai and refreshment break downstairs, so.
And I will be grateful. Now, this is information for my interest, but I want your views. Now, there are 5 questions here that I have.
I'm just concerned, Koja said get violent when they get hungry, so.
Yes, you can take my place. There you go. Look, these are the 5 questions that I want answers from. And then let's see. Why should you be a member of Kodesh National Muslim Community? Right? Why should you? The second one is what made you belong to Kodesh National Muslim Community? What is so good about Kodesh National Muslim Community that made you belong to it? So some of these questions are related to each other, so we can combine it into one. Then what is the future of the Kodesh National Muslim Community? And do you think that your children and great-grandchildren will enjoy the same benefit that you are enjoying at the moment? Why? Benefit. So, out of these questions, which one would you like to deal with? Even one question, I would be happy because I think you're dealing with one.
What was the first question, please?
Why should you be a member of Kodesh? Why do you belong to Kodesh? Why? Born is not an answer, bro. I mean, I want a rational way. I want to know why you want to belong.
Can we have one individual talk?
I understand. Okay.
Yeah, Sibtain Bhai, very provocative discussions you generated. I wanted to talk about why I'm proud to be a Khoja, and I think I have to relate it back to our history. I'm from Zanzibar, and in 1964, as a result of the revolution, we were completely uprooted. And my father, with 6 of us, took us to Morogoro, which is a small town, because he couldn't afford to live in Dar es Salaam. And there we started a business with 5,000 shillings that was loaned to us by the Supreme Council of Africa. And we started our business that thrived eventually. So that was one of the things that I feel so proud being a member of the Khoja Shia National community. The second one was when I emigrated from London, England, where I had been to study, and I went to Edmonton, Alberta, which was a small community in the prairies with only 30 Shia National people there. And we were supported by not only the World Federation to build up a community, but also by that time Vancouver had been established. And Mullah Asghar Marhoom, Allah may raise his status in the hereafter, he came and he brought people from Vancouver to help us germinate our community in Edmonton that today is still thriving. So those are the 2 things that makes me proud. And I always tell my children that do not leave this community because it is our being that you have to support. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr.
I think we'll give each individual a chance. So he answered the first question, I will have other gentlemen answer the other question.
Because I haven't read the book, I will ask you this question first. Did you come across the name of Abdullah Kanji as one of those who came earlier on from India?
I have come across the word Abdullah Kanji, yes.
Yes. And then yes, he must have gone to Zanzibar, as you say, and then finally he landed up in Mombasa. And then he started his business there.
That's right.
I understand that when he came from India, he brought textile goods to sell. And there was one trip which took, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months from India to Zanzibar, Mombasa. And it sold very well, his wares and goods. Then he would stay there 2-3 months and go back again to India. And then he came back. So I don't know which year would that fit in. But the point I'm making is that his friends, as part of this earlier, our great-grandfathers who came, they decided, why do we have to go back? We are doing so well here in business, we should settle down here. Have you come across that kind of narrative in your...
Read the book.
And just one suggestion. Have you been to Bengal already or not?
I have.
Did you meet Kurban Virji?
Kurban Virji? I can't.
He is from Nasser Virji family.
I didn't meet Kurban Virji, but I met the granddaughter of who is very much interested in the archives of the Virji family. I interviewed her, and then she supplied me with a lot of information, and the whole Virji family's story is there in the book.
Just to end with this note, that he's my mama, my mother's side. And he's also related to my, father's side, because my grandfather, his daughter, was his mother. So anyway, we are related from both ends. When I sat with him about 1 year ago,
I think Shabir stood up there.
Can we stick to answering the questions that Sibtain asked?
So, what your question is, why am I proud to
be a member of the Khoja.
And I think what I'm saying is related in the sense that when I sat down with these veterans who told me how did we end up coming to Africa and what kind of struggles, and as Brother Shokat also mentioned, that if they did this to become Khoja Shia Nashi, then it is only fair that I stay one, and I'm proud of it.
Okay. I just want to mention Brother Kurban भाई ये बात करी है, and I think you made a point. We were born. So born into the community, and we never think why we belong to this community and all that. That is a simple answer that I get from the majority of the seminars that I conduct. They do say we're born in the community, we think it's a beautiful community, and we are swimming in it, but they don't think. They always, when I ask them a question about the survival of this community, it will always be there for us. But without the input of the young people and the young blood, it will never be there. So my next question is, do you think, considering how we are at the moment, do you think that our children and our grandchildren will enjoy the same benefit as you are enjoying in the community? Do you think?
So, I'd just like to relate what my son, Bilal, told me. He said he would not be surprised in the future or just...
Can you? I'm asking.
My son Bilal says that, told him that he would be surprised if in the future our Khoja Baraza and mosques become simply Khoja clubs.
Khoja clubs.
catering to our, older people like us, rather than, because they don't have that sense of belonging to the community that we have. We have that because our formative years were spent in East Africa, where everything, I would not use the word racist that you were using earlier. I would rather say we are clannish. All Indians are clannish, like Patel would say, Loyal. So we develop that sense of community more because we are clannish. And to try to justify by providing various kinds of religious reasons, I'm sure the religion probably added to it, but this, our culture, we identify ourselves as Khojas more culturally, because there are other Shiite nationalists too. And I think that as time goes on, our children who do not identify themselves just Khoja, they identify themselves as Shiite nationalists. And they're going to probably.
Well, you have a point of view and I respect that, but please read the book because it will explain to you that our forefathers did take the way they had a very set feature in their mind as to why they themselves called Shiite nationalists. It wasn't based on culture, it was based on religion, it was based on faith. And if you look at even our constitution since then, faith becomes an integral part of our community. We have retained the prefix Khoja, and I'm explaining as to why we have retained the prefix Khoja. It's because we do come from Khoja community, and it related to our history and our heritage. But we did not carry with it the cultural baggage the way you have explained it. Our religion began to play a very formative core in our institutionalization. So when we formed our community, the core was faith, not culture. That's how I explain it. Now, we can put all sorts of, the book that I'm writing from 1960 to 2016 is obviously how we then evolved as a global community. And up till today, this is second, third, fourth generation, we have still retained the same prefix Khoja, but our evolution of understanding of faith is changing. Our understanding of the truth of Islam is also changing. That is something that obviously would be a discussion in this book. But the way you have put it, I would say I respect your point of view. But read the book, and you'll understand what the evidence is that I have gathered tells me this is the core of it upon which they institutionalize. Even if you look at the resolutions, the core resolutions were faith-based, not culture-based. I'm talking about resolution of the first regional conference before African Federation was officially formed. They passed 10 resolutions.
Yeah, we'll just have a quick comment from Munir, then we'll close with the Brahmas.
Sibtain, I see you've already taken 10 of your 15 minutes, and with due respect, I'm sure that they'll give you some more time, so I'll be very brief.
Okay, can I stop?
No, it's fine. I think the question you posed would be more relevant to the youngsters. At our age, we are more thinking about how we're going to face the Almighty in the year after. And thinking back at how we have lived in the community, we've got so much to cherish, be it from the religious perspective, giving us a peace of mind, giving us a society where we have endured in so many activities, be it sports, be it culturally, be it in the media, be it reaching out to others. So when we think back, we cannot even, I think there is nothing in us that would really make us feel that maybe we should leave the community. What for? But now when you ask the same question to a youngster, who is probably in the early 20s, he would come up with questions. Okay, we have organizations within our community, World Federation, Africa Federation, at the height of politics, sometimes in official meetings, things being totally religious norms being broken, certain thoughts not being allowed to come out in the open. A typical example.
I take your point. I think you're making a point, but I've already done that with young people. In the Awakening Project,
that I've conducted almost 50 seminars with young people. So these questions have already been asked them. Now I'm asking the older generation so that I have a comparison data from those who have lived this in East Africa and then come to West and now giving me their thought processes so I can compare. So by this respect, I've already done that for you. Otherwise I would not have been, it's a simple logical thing that I ask the youngsters first. Youngsters in Orlando, youngsters in Vancouver, youngsters in Toronto, youngsters in Sydney, youngsters in Dar es Salaam, all these. So I have this. Now I just wanted the feel of you guys, I think. You can allow me that.
Expect something out of the norm. You would expect, like what I said, most of us here would have something to cherish from the community, and not something which would.
Even that would be very useful. Absolutely right. Very useful, because that would give me why we should make our community exist. So that I cherish. Your experiences I cherish. Why are you still paying me money?
No, I'm not talking about you know these things to.
We'll finish with final comment from Baraza, please.
My comment was to your last question, that for the younger generation to continue with these institutions, and the issue that I hear, like somebody combined my man, his son, and the younger people, that we don't need Koja, we are a Shia Shinashi community. If you accept that in our minds, I can't figure out how our institutions will operate in the multiculturalism that we are all in currently in our institutions. Without Koja being there, how are these institutions going to continue? Because as you said from your book and your research, the entrepreneurs and our forefathers made that for our community. This is lacking in our current generation going forward. So that's my comment. Okay? And the other thing I would just like to say for everybody, perhaps they can take your email address and share their any concerns, comments with you even after here, so you will have that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Great.
Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We'll just close briefly with the last words from Bashir Bhai. And before that, I'd like to thank you all for attending here. Sibtain Bhai, thank you very much. Thank you to the Crescent Village administration for supporting this. And if I may request to end before we ask Bashir Bhai for a few words here, for Surah Fatiha for Shiraz Al-Hussein Nur Muhammad and Muhammad Abbas Muhammad Taqi and all our remains, please.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters in faith. Mine is a completely unscheduled appearance. I'm here on behalf of Crescent Village Housing Corporation as a member of the board to say how very happy we are that this Baraza is continuing. We know what a lot of good work it is doing, and we're very happy that Shabir Bhai and Murtaza Bhai have come forward to take the management of Baraza. Secondly, in 2012, Crescent Village Housing Corporation was given an award of excellence for being the best housing provider within the whole province of Ontario. There were about 700 housing corporations that were all in the competition to be recognized as the best housing provider. We were the ones who were awarded this. I'm pleased to advise that we have applied again in this year, 2022, after waiting for what?
2 years.
2008. 14 years,
Yes.
we've applied again. We are very hopeful that we will be accepted and recognized again as the best housing provider, and look forward to receiving that award of excellence if and when we do. Now, this is under consideration. The decision is coming out, I think, on the 4th of November. And that's when we will know whether we have succeeded in our application. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. If everybody can join us downstairs for some Chinese refreshments, and again, yeah, and for anybody who wants to purchase Sibtain Panjwani's book, we have books available here, and we have Sibtain Panjwani available here to personalize it for you. So feel free. You can do it here. You can do it downstairs. What is that?
So we just wanted to thank you all for attending. I know it took longer than expected, but I hope you enjoyed the delivery, and thank you, Sibtain Panjwani, for your answer. Thank you for your insightful lecture. It was quite interesting. Yes, I know I'm going to read the book. Please join us downstairs, but I just wanted to let you know that we are now, Shabir and I are the co-chair for the Baraza group. And hopefully you'll all join us going forward, okay? So the group is still here and here to stay. Thank you very much. And I want to thank Zuli as well. Zuli's our IT guy, and thank you, Zuli, for hanging around, and hope you understood something about the Khwaja history.
It's recorded in for Sibtain Panjwani's history.
Yeah.